What if everything we've been told about autoimmunity is wrong? I'm Elizabeth Yarnell. After awakening partially blind one morning in 1999, a doctor told me my multiple sclerosis would put me in a wheelchair within 10 years. I refused to accept that as the end of the story, so I started investigating. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, the podcast that uncovers the inflammation lurking underneath your ailments. Because autoimmune and chronic conditions should not be viewed as death knells when they are actually alarm bells. I'm a traditional naturopath and founder of the Inflammation Academy. And in 2 episodes every week, we dig into what conventional medicine might be missing. If you're living with chronic or unexplained symptoms, this investigation is for you. Your body has been trying to tell you something. Let's start listening.
In the last few episodes, we've been talking about how multiple sclerosis is a result of damage to the myelin sheaths from inflammation. Now we're going to move into a series of episodes about inflammation itself. In fact, chronic inflammation, and how that is really at the root of most, if not all, chronic disease. This section is called It's All About Inflammation. "How are you with parsnips?" my husband asked one morning during the pandemic as we prepped vegetables bound for the crock pot on a snowy winter day. I had to stop and think about it, as I honestly had no idea. I couldn't recall the last time I had eaten parsnips. A reality of living with MS for me is the constant query of, will this item trigger inflammation in my body, or is it safe? As I considered if I could safely eat parsnips or not, I was a good 20 years into my being super aware of every last thing that goes into my body journey. I'd been extensively tested for allergies and food sensitivities, and I'd amassed a list of foods that I knew for sure would have undesirable effects on my body, as well as a list of foods that I knew to be safe and not inflammatory for me. But parsnips? They weren't on my unsafe list, but neither were they on my known safe list. I remembered long ago enjoying pureed parsnips at a restaurant. So I took a chance and we loaded the stew with the yummy root veggie along with other wholesome ingredients that I confidently knew would not cause inflammation in my body. After simmering all day, the soup was delicious. I ate 2 heaping bowls. About half an hour after dinner, as my husband and I were sitting on the couch in the family room watching a movie together, I had a vague but strong feeling that all was not right in my body. Nothing I could pinpoint, just a rising sensation of feeling unwell. I stood up shakily and quickly realized I had very little time to get upstairs to my bedroom. I couldn't say exactly why I felt that way, but I knew my time as a functioning human was running out that day. I made a beeline for the staircase, but made it up only as far as the midway landing, where I crumpled in a boneless heap. Sprawled between flights, my head resting on my forearms on the next step up, I was now stuck. I tried to will myself to stand, but my body was not responding. I'm just going to stay here for a little while, I remember thinking. I couldn't move in any case. I was just going to lay there until I felt stronger and steadier. But I had to pee, and I remember starting to feel chilly. After maybe 5, maybe 10, or even 30 minutes, time seemed to be standing still. I rallied my strength and called out to my husband, who was still watching an action movie in the family room. The volume on the TV was either too loud for him to hear me, or maybe my voice wasn't as loud as I thought it was. It took a couple tries. He found me, still on the landing, and was confused as to what I was doing there. "I'm having an MS attack," I said, just realizing this truth as I said it. He asked how long I had been there and why I hadn't said something to him sooner. I didn't have any good answers. He ascended to the landing and tried to help me stand by leaning over me and lifting me up from beneath the armpits. The sensation of being moved from a prone position threw me into a tailspin, and I cried out. My body turned to jelly, and I slid back down through his arms like an intransigent toddler. Back in a ragdoll heap on the landing, I wondered if I might vomit. My husband sat down next to me and patiently asked if I knew what had brought on this MS attack. He remembered the parsnips before I did. The parsnips! The parsnips were the sole unknown variable. He was probably right. It's so helpful to have someone else around to do the detective work at times like these. I always remind my clients that when there is inflammation in the body, there is also inflammation in the brain, because inflammation is systemic and travels through the bloodstream everywhere the blood goes. In the midst of an inflammatory flare, an inflamed brain makes it incredibly challenging to think clearly enough to identify possible triggers. Not only is it hard to think clearly when your brain is swollen, but oftentimes the onset of symptoms is delayed by hours or even days, making it even more difficult to trace the symptom back to the trigger. This particular hypersensitivity reaction caused by the parsnips had come on fast and hard in under an hour, making it very easy to correlate to eating the parsnips. Eventually, with my husband's help, we got me up the remaining 6 steps and onto the floor of the upstairs hallway. He proposed I just stay there in the hallway with a blanket and a pillow, and it sounded inviting. I was exhausted and scared. Yes, even after more than 20 years of dealing with MS flares, I am frightened every time. But I still had to pee, and I desperately wanted to be in my bed. It probably took another 20 or so torturous minutes to get me there by slithering along the corridor. Reaching into the drawer of my bedside table, I grabbed the homeopathic antihistamine remedy that I knew would help calm the inflammatory response, put a few drops underneath my tongue, and went to sleep. By early the following morning, although tired and feeling somewhat hungover, I felt overall much better and could walk again. The inflammation storm had washed over me, hopefully too quickly to leave any lasting damage. MS is well known for being a capricious and unpredictable disease. In the early years of my post-diagnosis life, each MS attack would linger in my body for 6 weeks or longer. At that time, I hadn't yet come to learn about the concept of inflammation triggers or the corresponding solution of inflammation abatement. Nor had I begun to seek and use natural remedies to resolve inflammation once it flared. From my perspective as an MS patient, episodes of inflammation that resolve overnight, like this one from Parsnips did, once I took action, barely register as serious MS exacerbations on the same scale as the time I had optic neuritis. And that is the whole point of understanding MS inflammation connection. To reduce the length of time an MS attack lasts so that it is a forgettable blip in a medical history rather than the beginning of endless symptoms of pain, discomfort, or dysfunction, and further progression into multiple sclerosis. The medical world knows that the longer an MS flare-up lasts, the less likely a complete recovery becomes, and the more likely we are to end up with permanent damage to the myelin sheaths. Eventually, people with relapsing remitting MS, RRMS, progress to more frequent inflammatory flare-ups with less and less complete recovery as time goes on, which is when the diagnosis moves into primary progressive MS, PPMS, when remissions no longer arrive at all and there is no recovery of functional abilities or pauses between the flares. The disease's name changes to secondary progressive MS, SPMS. This is why allopathic doctors often prescribe corticosteroids and other anti-inflammatory drugs during exacerbations with the hope of reducing inflammation before it causes permanent damage. Unfortunately, those drugs come with their own set of side effects. My goal is to avoid inflammation before it happens, recognize it quickly when it does happen, and nip it in the bud before it sticks around long enough to cause damage. You can do this too. Be sure to tune in to the next solo episode when we talk about how most symptoms are due to inflammation.
And that's another case filed on the Inflammation Investigator. Remember, every symptom is your body's way of communicating. We just need to learn the language. If today's episode sparked something for you, I want to hear about it. Share your own investigation discoveries with me on social media at Elizabeth Yarnell, or find me at elizabethyarnell.com. Your experience could be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And here's the thing about investigations. They work best when you're not going it alone. If this podcast is helping you uncover the answers you've been searching for, please like, rate, subscribe, and review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. As a new podcast, these actions mean more than you know. Want to dive deeper into your own inflammation investigation? Head over to inflammationinvestigator.com, where you can take my free inflammation quiz to uncover which hidden triggers might be affecting your health. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Yarnell, your inflammation investigator, reminding you that the solutions to your health issues are out there. Let's find them together.